I'd like to welcome our second panel. Dr. Tom Coburn is United States Senator from the state of Oklahoma. Dr. Coburn, we really appreciate you taking so much time out of your busy schedule as well to be able to appear before the subcommittee today. Your entire written statement will obviously be made a part of the record. You have done extensive work in grant research, and we are very grateful for your testimony today and be very honored to be able to receive that now.
Well, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be before you. I was just observing the members in here. Not one of you were in the House with me, which was not all that long ago. I left in 2000, so it's a privilege and a pleasure to come before you. I want to say at the outset, your last panel, I've worked with Danny Werfel for 7 years, and it's phenomenal. Glad he's where he is now. But when you talk about IGs, they are key to us knowing what's going on. The Government Accountability Office is key. And I could not work in the Senate without the Congressional Research Service. They are excellent. So we have the tools to solve the problems in front of us. The problem is not enough people know what the problem is. And I would say if you're looking for a model agency on how they handle grants, is go look at the Museum and Library Sciences. First of all, there's not a grant that they put out that they don't follow up. There's not a grant that they don't check to see if they're meeting the requirements of the grant that was submitted. So they have 100% follow-up. And so consequently, the expectation has changed in terms of libraries and museums that if you get a grant for the federal government, you better perform. In other words, they have created the expectation. And we don't even hardly look at them anymore because they really do a great job. So they're a great model. And so if you wanted to follow up on this, is to bring them up and say, what are you all doing? Because I can guarantee it's not being done in the rest of the government the way they do it. The other thing I would tell, Mr. Werfel talked about USAspending.gov. Myself and President Obama were the authors of that. And they're basically in violation of that bill because they were supposed to have subgrants and subcontractors on that at this time, and they've chosen not to put the resources in to get there. But if we had subgrantees and subcontractors on it, you could actually find, you can search that site by anything. It's like a Google site. You put in the name fish, you'll see every penny we spend on fish. In other words, it's a good site. It just hadn't been fully blended out, and the granularity in there is because we don't put the subcontracts and subgrants in there so that you can know. And it's important to know through the grant process who's getting the money and for what. And it's not just to look at the money, but what's being done with it to see if it's really a purpose that we intend. As you noted, my statement will be made part of the record, and I'll be very brief. We've done several reports on grants and agencies through my office, and I could not do that without GAO and CRS, and the IGs as well. They make it easy for us to put together the information. But the last one, and let me talk about the National Science Foundation. I am a big supporter of NSF. They do key, legitimate government work and a priority to keep us ahead of the curve. But even the agencies that I love are wasteful. And so what we did was a report, and you can't really reflect that on the present management because the present director's only been there 6 months. So this report that we put forward actually reflects what happened before he got there. But we had some pretty significant findings. You know, when grants aren't utilized, you're supposed to get the money back. And we found $1.7 billion in money that should be ours that wasn't pulled back. You know, and that's 25% of their annual budget. So we found that money that they should have been pulling back, that was growing every year. And all that is management, paying attention when something expired and getting rid of it. We also found a significant amount of low priority projects, which means they weren't paying attention. $80,000 study why the same teams dominate March Madness. Well, the same teams don't dominate it, so the premise under the study in the first place, and I'm not sure what that lends to us as a country in terms of creating leading science technology. So the point is I think if we have great oversight, and I think I'm on the Oversight Committee on the other side of the hill, the purpose ought to be is to call attention to where we're missing the mark in terms of what our goals are. So other things, $1 million for an analysis of how quickly parents respond to trendy baby names. Now, you know, as a scientist, I have trouble finding out how that as a country, especially in a constricted budget environment, is going to help us. You know, what's the positive thing that's going to come out of that research? Maybe there is something, but is it a priority? And does a cost-benefit analysis say for what we're going to get, could we have spent the money somewhere else to get much better leading-edge technologies? $315,000 study Farmville, whether Farmville on Facebook helps adults' relationships. $581,000 to study whether online dating users are racist in their dating habits. Maybe there's value in that, but the point is it's all about priorities. And the reason in a lot of grants that you're not seeing priorities is because we're not looking at it. We're not holding the agencies accountable. Here's a mission statement, here's what we're supposed to be doing, and then they kind of get off track. And the reason they can get off track is because they're not before the Congress every year, somebody going over their grants with them. So aggressive oversight is one of the most important things we can do. It doesn't mean we're right about our assessment of what they're doing, but knowing that they have to come before and explain their grants will limit a lot of questionable grants that go out there for things that don't have great cost-benefit analysis to us. We also found significant fraud and inappropriate expenditures at the National Science Foundation. We also found significantly poor contracting practices. And let me comment on something the other panel said. There shouldn't be, other than in rare instances, any grant that isn't competitive. There should not be any contract that isn't competitive. And where we know we have problems in our government, for example, we have $64 billion a year in IT, $32 billion of that is at risk. In other words, it's never going to get accomplished. We will have blown 50% of our IT budget, and we do it every year. We blow it, and because of the way we contract and the way we oversight it. So there's a lot of money that we can spend more wisely and also get greater value for the American public if we make sure, one, that we competitively bid all these things, and number two is we know what we want before we contract. And that's a big problem in the Defense Department. It's a big problem in the large agencies. They don't know what they want, and they write a contract anyway. And what they should be doing is waiting until they figure out or create only a research contract to say what is it that we want. It is a giant problem that has $100 billion worth of waste a year in the federal government. And let me just talk for a second about the poor contracting practices, and then I'll stop. We found that NSF in 2010 spent $422 million for contracts, $283 million of which were not competitively bid. They were cost plus. And they were paid regardless of whether the work was completed or not. 70% of the $204 million went to contracts permitting advance payments to just 3 groups. And none of these contractors had an approved disclosure statement, so what happened, the agency couldn't identify or document the actual costs, which is a problem with the contract at the beginning. In other words, they didn't do it right at the beginning, and when they found that they couldn't get what they wanted, they didn't have the tools to find out whether or not they got good value because they couldn't get the information. And then final thing, that one of the things we have to do as a Congress is, with all the grant, is the tremendous amount of duplication. And I'll give you an example in NSF. NSF has 15 programs. NSF is one of 15 programs, 72 sub-agencies, and 12 independent agencies engaged in research and development. In other words, we don't just have NIH, the Defense Department Research, and NSF. We have 72 sub-agencies, 15 federal departments, and 12 independent agencies. And out of that has come, we're all interested in education. We're interested in getting more scientists, more technologists, more engineers, more math. Well, we now have in the federal government 105 science, technology, engineering, and math programs. 28 of them are coming through the National Science Foundation at a cost of $1.2 billion. None of them are cross-referenced to see if they're duplicating anything else that the rest of the federal government's doing, and not one of them has a metric on it to whether or not it's accomplishing the purpose. So the whole idea, when you begin to look at grants, then you start looking at the bigger area. We need to focus down and put somebody in charge of science, technology, and math, but not 12 different agencies that are spending over $2.5 billion a year with no measurements in terms of what the results are. So you cannot, there's methodology in how the agencies utilize grants, but we're responsible for allowing all the duplication that's come because we've passed the legislation and appropriation bills that have actually caused it. With that, I'll take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Coburn, very much for being able to come on. I'm just going to bounce a couple things off just for additional information. Let me start with the last statement you were making about duplication. A lot of the stories we've heard, we've seen some of the reports that are coming out on it. How do you get there? How do you actually start combining those? I understand legislatively, ultimately we have a responsibility, but we're talking about killing one program and moving that money over, whatever percentage it may be, to another and combining multiple agencies. Realistically, how do we get there?
I think you have to have the leadership where you have cross jurisdiction among committees to have come together and say, okay, let's say science, technology, engineering, and math. You take the committees in the House and the Senate that are responsible for those, say what is it we have some expert, what is it we really want to accomplish in that? What are the 128 programs we have today, or 105 programs that we have today that are doing that? Where are they directed? And what is it that we really need? And then split that up and come to a consensus that we're going to have a combined committee that's going to address that and agree to it. And none of these are partisan issues. It's just a matter of silliness and the right hand not knowing what the left hand's doing. So it's a great question, but you got to have, first of all, you got to know there's a problem there to address it, and then you got to build a consensus within each body to say, let's get together and form a joint committee to address science, technology, engineering, math. And let's eliminate, let's have one set of bureaucracy running this rather than 20.
Right.
And, you know, what we did with the last debt limit, we got GAO. When we went to GAO and CRS, we asked them this question. We would like a list of all the programs in the federal government. They both told us, take a hike, there's no way you can do it. Both of them did. And I understand that. It is a massive project. There's only one agency that lists all their programs. That's the Department of Education. You can go to any head of any agency and they can't tell you all their programs. They don't even have them written down. So we have, over the next 2 years, the rest of the federal government is going to be coming through GAO to where we're going to see every program, every agency. Now, I'm trying to attach in the Senate to every bill that goes through there a mandate that each agency has to list each year of their programs, just so they know what they are and so we can know what they are. And the problem is so big and so massive, you have to start by knowing what are the programs. Last year, 2 times in one of the committee, I won't name which committee, we had members of the Senate offer amendments to do well-intentioned things without knowing that we already had a program in the department doing exactly what they were writing. Exactly. And of course, the amendment was withdrawn when they were made aware of that. But the fact is most of us as members of the Congress aren't aware. So you have to aggressively pursue it.
Right. We've been working on that on this committee as well, looking for areas just to get disclosure out there in the public, even to have a website that lists not only the agency, but all the programs that are within that agency so that anyone can get a chance to look and see where their dollars are spent, what programs are available, and how much goes into that program, as well as how many staff are dedicated to that. Yeah. And that gives people a basic look on it. Let me ask you a question about some of these grant programs that you had mentioned before that are coming up, that developing a relationship through Farmville. I don't remember a bill that was related to that. How do grants like that come into existence?
Well, it's because we're lazy legislators. And we do that because, number one, we're not thorough. Number two is a lot of times, if you don't know what you want, you're not any different than the agency that's passing a grant out there. You need to know what you want before you write it, and what you intend and what you expect. And then you need to follow up. You know, when was the last time every agency in the federal government was oversighted? With 535 members of Congress, we could do that every 2 years if we would do it. And you know what? You'd see a marked change in the bureaucracy.
Yeah, the transparency side, not only coming back to Congress to be able to denote that, but also to be able to get it out just to the general public. So any individual can get a chance to look in and see the grants, how they're spent, what they're spent on, and that anyone could look over their shoulder. And so then you have the possibility of a newspaper out there going through all the details of each and every grant. And it's not only a congressional committee, but it's also that media source that's out there asking the same questions and providing.
You can do that on usaspending.gov right now.
If it was populated.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, if it was populated with all the information.
Yeah, well, for example, in museum and library sciences, I think you could go there and you can see every grant. I mean, they're very compliant. Now, they're small, but they've also been extremely aggressive to making sure they're great stewards with that money.
It's terrific. I'd like to recognize Mr. Conley for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Senator Coburn.
Thank you.
And thank you for your vigilance in protecting the U.S. tax dollar. And shedding some light on research and grant funding. Let me just share with you concerns, though, I have maybe on the other side. I heard you say that you thought that all of these grants ideally ought to be competitively bid. Respectfully, I guess I'd want to see the ability of the Federal Government in awarding research and development grants preserved. I would remind us of the fact that, for example, the successful crash effort to make sure the United States had the atom bomb before the Nazis was not competitively bid. I spent 20 years of my life in the private sector for organizations that did federal research, and I saw firsthand where there was value in preserving the flexibility for the Federal agency to look at expertise and say, I don't want to sort of, reinvent the wheel. You've got that expertise. We want to fund that because that can develop something that's going to help our economy or help medicine or whatever it may be. So just a word of caution. I think you're right, and I'm not unsympathetic with the idea that by and large we ought to have a really good reason why something isn't competitively bid. But to go to a rigid formula where everything is competitively bid, especially in the research field, I think could be risky, frankly, and could choke innovation unwittingly.
Let me respond to that. I think if all else being, you only have one company or one institution that's capable of doing what you want to do, I think that's true. But I would put out to you that the reason we have 7 major weapon development and no capital risk exposure by those companies that were involved in it. And human nature is whatever you want, since it's cost plus, we'll do it for you. So we have 3 problems in the Federal Government in terms of that contracting. One is our contracting experts we're losing. We have a real problem with contract managers. We're short on them, and we're short on experienced contract managers. And there's great wisdom in them because they have the experience, they've known these businesses, they know who can actually do what. So I'd tell you that's the first thing. The second thing, in a lot of agencies, including the Pentagon, we don't have an adult in the room as far as requirement creep. And when you look at the programs, and the third problem we have is we have across agencies, when we do cost plus contracting, it's lowballed on purpose. Because they know it's going to cost a whole lot more, but they want to get it started because they know once they get it started and once we get a lot of money invested in it, we'll be less reticent to pull the plug on it. So I think you could address all those 3, but I agree with you. If we have a level of expertise, but I would tell you if there's 2 of them that have that level of expertise, we ought to have them compete. If there's nobody that has the level of expertise, then I'm fine.
I agree.
Fine with that.
I agree, and I'm glad you brought up acquisition expertise in the Federal Government. And by the way, I commend to you Susan Collins' bill. I introduced it here in the House. Susan Collins has a companion bill on the Federal Acquisition Institute trying to upgrade those capabilities. We've got to hire more people to manage contracts. And you're right, we need continuity. One of the requirement creep often occurs because you have multiple project managers over the life of a contract, many of them. One more point I'd like to make, if I can, and that is, and you did not do this, I don't mean to imply you did, but one of the things that sometimes concerns me is that in the political arena, we make fun of research. I can remember in my campaign last year, my opponent went on and on and on about funding research on monkeys. Well, it happened to be HIV research, and monkeys were the best analog for
Yeah, they're a
human beings.
primate, yeah.
And it was, frankly, to me, a despicable thing, but it became in the political arena. There's one that came up recently, Mr. Chairman, at the Science and Technology Committee, and the Golden Fleece Award, which was issued by a Democrat from Wisconsin at the time, was given to an odd-sounding study called The Sexual Behavior of the Screwworm Fly. Why would we waste $250,000 on that? And yet that research turns out, which was cost $250,000, saved millions of livestock. It's estimated it saved and enhanced the cattle industry profits by $20 billion and lowered the cost of beef at the supermarket by 5%. Other than that, yes, it was a frivolous piece of federal research. So it's easy to demagogue research sometimes, especially with the public not spending time on research directly. And I would hope that all of us in the political arena would show a little bit more respect for what we're trying to do, as you cited.
I agree. There's a lot. We don't know the depths and the intents, but that's the other thing that ought to be put in the grant. What are we trying to accomplish here? When you read a grant proposal and you don't see the endpoint in it, and you don't see what they're actually going for, then we ought to be asking a question about every one of those. You know, it's the same thing like the pine beetle out west right now. If we'd had good research on hurting its reproductive capability, we wouldn't have half the forests in Colorado and Wyoming turning brown right now. So, look, I'm a two-time cancer survivor. I believe in science. It's why I'm still alive. But the point is even our good agencies like NSF need to be oversighted so that when they're not paying attention, they will pay attention. And that's my whole point.
Thank you.
I'd enjoy multiple rounds of conversation with us, but you have a vote coming up very shortly as well on the Senate side. We appreciate your time and very much value your input on this and look forward to getting a chance for our committees to be able to work together in the future.
Thank you very much.
And with that, this committee hearing is adjourned.